So Matthew, welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup podcast, and it's really a great pleasure to have you. You've done so much, and I find that I had to kind of do some research about you, and it's amazing because you have quite a lot of content online, but not in the form of a video, which I think it's much more personal and provide the ability for people to see who you are, not just outside of the nuts and bolts of cybersecurity, but just get a feel overall about your story and your, kind of your journey. And I would love to start with that, with your permission. And then we'll jump into where you are in the world and how you're actually connected to this conversation today. Matthew, thanks for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, and sure, let's we'll see we'll see how the conversation goes. But anyway, I'll give you a cheers to some coffee this morning.
I'm having my own double shot espresso. So
nice.
How did you get started in cybersecurity and became a prominent senior authority in the space?
Wow, gosh, it was a mistake. I was working in a software development role for a 3D animation company. I decided that I wanted to become an MCSE and found a job with a small company called Coalfire at the time. I think less than $2 million of revenue. And I had that job and I had a job at Chili's. And I had interviewed for those back to back. And it took me a long time to find a job after I graduated. Luckily Coalfire gave me the job. And so I started building endpoints for pen testers, and then quickly transitioned into a pen test role because I was helping them doing debugging. And of course, in a small consulting firm like that, a billable resource is better than one that's sitting on your SG&A. And so, so that was my first transition was into,
quick question for you. So what would you say, the things that made you attractive to them at the time? Did you tell them that you're applying for two jobs simultaneously and one is Chili's, or was it you kept that a secret? What was that they saw in you specifically because you had no experience, right? Because a lot of people are struggling with that piece to get that first role.
Yeah, I think it was. Look, they were hiring me for an entry-level help desk role, right? So I wasn't entering cybersecurity actually.
Right.
I was entering IT, leaving development, entering core IT help desk in order to become an MCSE and get my CCNA next. And so then the transition was a natural transition, and I started to watch these guys participate in, really interesting engagements with banks and other things. And at the time I was 20 years old, and the idea that I could be handing a bank manager his password was I was flabbergasted. I just thought to myself, this is crazy. Like, how can we be so insecure? And it wasn't one bank, it was bank after bank after bank after bank. So maybe it was power. Maybe that's what I was attracted to at first, was just this like immediate access to huge swaths of information and power. I don't know. Maybe that was it.
And do you think that the fact that you basically were not picky about what to get, so you basically said, okay, I'm going to just get into this field regardless, and I'll start doing something. And as you mentioned, you weren't too picky about what that something would be. And also, you did a computer electrical engineering, which is a very very top heavy on the STEM and mathematics side, which is not easy as well, right? So kind of you kind of glass over that.
Yeah, I did. I graduated with a computer electrical engineering degree, and then I had a certificate in embedded systems. So I thought I was going to be the next chip designer for Intel, but I come from a blue collar family. I'm a first generation scholar in terms of college grad, and nobody was offering perspective that they're not going to hire you out of your undergrad degree to go design chips at Intel. So, it was a rude awakening for me to sort of get that reality check. And, but you're right. I had, in the course of my college career, had designed circuits and built robots and even written my own version of a TCP/IP stack for real-time embedded systems.
Wow. Was it more efficient?
Yeah,
or did you have to rewrite it?
Because they make you do weird stuff. I mean, we also wrote a programming language in a pragmatic programming language course. So not because we needed another programming language, but just because it's to teach you the fundamentals. So, yeah.
And do you think that since you have such a, relatively speaking, deep understanding in the underlying nuts and bolts of computing, do you think that helped you propel your career further? Just because you have that kind of the baseline of, I'll be honest with you, not a lot of CISOs today have that kind of technical training. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. People, come from all walks of life, and I think we need that diversity. But you, in particular, have a very unique skill set that I have not come across yet.
I think that I'm in this constant battle. I mean, you can even see it in my resume today. I wrote a book about business knowledge, and if you look at my recent sort of academic pursuits, if you will, it's AWS, Azure, and Kubernetes certification. So I'm constantly tugged in two directions. On one hand, how do I be a better executive and a better leader? And on the other hand, I like to tinker, and I still think one of my funnest roles in my entire career was just the pen test lead role. Just breaking stuff was so much fun. Breaking stuff is way more fun than building in a lot of ways, because you don't even have to be an expert. There's not really a lot of pressure. You don't have, uptime requirements. It was just there was a lot less stress and a lot more adrenaline in that role. So, yeah, for sure.
We should design a shirt, never stop tinkering. So even if you get to a management role, you still, the fact that you have that curiosity and, that need to break stuff, because that's fundamentally what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to, as cybersecurity professionals, we're trying to, protect, from our systems to be broken. And the only way you can effectively do that if you know how to break stuff. So I think that you have to have the ability to see both sides of the fence. It's so interesting as well is that you mentioned that you felt the thrill of breaking stuff, but pen testing in particular, there's a lot of empty hours where you try until you come across a glimpse of maybe like a thread where you start pulling and start figuring out. What in particular did you enjoy while you did that? And do you remember the first couple incidents where you managed to uncover vulnerabilities or managed to break into systems? Well,
I mean, early on, probably the first thing was just the basic scanners, right? So you're running an Nmap and I think it was still early days when I started. I forget when Rapid7 was founded, but I remember working with their team to unravel a timing bug in their software at some point. So I remember the scan results and the vulnerability testing, and early on it was about just validating that the results were valid, and that gradually led you to understand sort of what are the technology stacks that will frequently have flaws, and it gave you an intuitive approach to, okay, well, if I see a PHP stack and I'm sitting next to it at the same company as, something on .NET, I'm going to start with the PHP stack because there's way more likelihood that I'm going to pop something on this box, and then maybe I can pivot in to something that's proximate in the DMZ or something like that. So I don't know. I remember MSO 4060 as the first shell, popping that with the early versions of Metasploit, and I remember thinking that HD Moore was a god. I think I haven't thought about this in forever. I definitely remember some of the first web exploits because that was a completely different skill set for me going up the stack. If you think about it, I was very familiar and comfortable with the infrastructure layer stuff, and so the translation into some of the app layer was interesting. And even early on, when I went to Coalfire, my adjustment was from a .NET programming role at a 3D animation company, and so I ended up taking that entire knowledge base and the MSDN subscriptions were available, so I could download the .NET development tools, and I wrote my own custom fuzzer for a .NET app for a payments. I forget what they're called, but payments. It was for IP commerce back in the day, and we ended up. What did we do with that thing? We ended up just testing some API endpoints, which at the time, ages ago, the front end of microservices, I think they called it service-oriented architecture back then. So I remember bits and pieces, glimpses, but it's been 20 years or more. Gosh, no, it hasn't been quite 20 years, but almost that.
Do you miss those days? Like, do you ever, think, okay, because you could have taken that path as well. You could have continued becoming, potentially just maybe leading, specifically like software tools to break into stuff or design, additional components, because there's a lot of demand there as well.
I think, I don't see it as all that different, and here's why. Along the way, at some point, right before, I want to say before Jobs died, he talked about giving inputs to systems and seeing what they are as outputs. And the idea was that you have this black box of a system. So if the black box is a .NET app or a PHP app or a server or a department or an organization, it doesn't matter. You give an input and it elicits a response. And you can see what you can do with that response. And sometimes you can manipulate the inputs in order to get an output in a different way. So if you think about all of the things that we wrote about in the book, it's really, in a lot of ways, fundamentally tied to that mindset. If I present to the board in a particular way, I can be aware of my intent, and my intent might be to elicit a particular feeling in a particular board member. Or if I talk to somebody who I need to take action on a particular remediation, there's a couple of different ways that I can think about influencing them. I can use peer pressure, I can use individual motivation, I can think about leveraging organizational structure in order to put pressure on them from even from talking to their manager and getting bits and pieces of security output structured into their bonus, for example. So there's lots of, there's input, black box, output, and then you manipulate the inputs to see what you get out. It's the same as, manipulating an XML injection into a website. It's the same thing. So,
I love the analogy. And you've fulfilled different roles as a consultant, as a services manager. You have such a round experience. You were at the kind of the service provider, the kind of the vendor side, but you were also a large enterprise, and you fulfilled several roles. Does that make you today, more aware of the overall industry in terms of how, how the whole cybersecurity industry, because there's a lot of areas within the cybersecurity today where a little bit of contention, right? So you have kind of the vendors versus quote unquote the enterprise, and you hear a lot of people on the kind of the different social media how they kind of bitch and complain about that relationship and how it's there's a lot to be said about that. What's your take on it in terms of like, there are 3,000 plus vendors, very prolific from a kind of development of new, shiny tools perspective, but yet we're still, in a lot of ways, we're not, as far ahead as we want it to be from a risk protection perspective.
Well, look, there's an enormous economic opportunity. Cyber valuations are huge. the world is becoming more digital. 60 or 70% of GDP going forward will be built on the backs of digital platforms. So that's a world economic, somewhere in there, 60 or 70, it's a World Economics Forum metric from about a year ago. So you've got people that are pursuing economic opportunities, and I'm not going to be upset about that. I mean, I want my son to be aware of where the tide is flowing and position himself in an industry that's thriving, not in an industry that's dying. So I'm not going to raise him and say, hey, you should become a steel mill operator, because that doesn't make sense. So no, I don't really feel that. I do feel like my paces on the vendor side help me empathize with trying to crack open the door, and it's only gotten more difficult. Like you mentioned, the vendor landscape has exploded, and so it's not one MDR vendor, it's 15 that are trying to get in the door, and that's true for every independent category. So I see the world a lot different than some of the other guys, and it's also true. I'm not. Logicworks has got a fantastic story and an amazing growth trajectory and all of that, but I'm not sitting in the role where I'm the chief of a Fortune 10 company. So the outreach and my experience is maybe a little bit different in terms of the volume of activity, because everybody knows you make your quota for the year if you can get a whatever product sold to the Bank of America or to whatever at scale. I mean, certainly they do POCs and smaller, they dabble in other areas and such, but so I think I just have a lot more empathy for vendors. The other thing is, look, my program is not successful without my vendors. It's not, and I want to see them succeed. And I have peers who are trying to do a lot of the same things that I do, and I want to share the successes that we have. So my VRM tool, or my endpoint, or the SOC team that I've managed to outsource to, or my third-party risk program, or my auditors, or any of it, if I'm having a great experience, to the extent that I can, I want to promote them, because I want them to be successful. And the more cash that they have, the more innovation that they're going to bring back to me. And then the last piece is I like to sit in a position of influence with my vendors if I can, which is why you see that I sit on a number of advisory board roles, and have not always gone to the largest vendors in the marketplace, but gone to vendors who I think have a lot of promise and who are willing to be responsive to the needs that we have as an organization. So.
And man, I have so many questions. I'm trying to keep it all in order, because every time you say something, there's more threads I'd like to pull. Specifically, you mentioned that you feel empathy with the vendors. What can they do if there was a couple things they can do today to really kind of break through that noise, as you mentioned, and become more successful? And again, you have the unique view to be on the inside as well as on the outside, both sides of the fence, which is very unique. What would that be? What would you recommend to some of these vendors? And I'm assuming you do some of that to the companies you advise today.
I think Clayton Christensen, who talks about the innovator's dilemma, he wrote How to Measure Your Life and a couple of other things that, rest in peace. He's had a really big influence on the way that I see things, the way that I think about things. And one of the things that he talks about is a job to be done, right? So I'm not out buying take your pick, whatever the solution is, an email filtering tool. That's not what I'm trying to do, right? I didn't wake up and be like, well, hey, I need to buy one of these. That's not the case. I set out to achieve a particular goal. And so I think instead of getting into these meetings and telling me about the kill chain for the 700th time, like I have never heard the kill chain before, really spend some time understanding what it is that I'm about and what I'm trying to do. And you need to come up with more interesting questions than what keeps you up at night, right? If you're going to sell me an email tool, I understand that you have a hammer and you're looking for nails. But at the same time, I think if you can broaden the context of your conversation, then you have a lot more success. And that's what we did a lot of times at Fishnet. I was in there for the purposes of supporting services. And oftentimes we had something like 100 different sales reps, and I supported between 4 and 10 at any given time. And so I would sort of baseline and compare performance across all of them. And some of them sold only services, and some of them sold only technology. And at that time, it was mostly slinging boxes because the cloud wasn't really a thing, right? And we would go into conversations to sell a firewall, and we would walk out with 3 services engagements by just asking questions. Hey, help me understand. Why are you doing this? How does this connect to your business outcomes? What specifically does this mean? The other thing that became apparent, which is why we wrote the book, is a lot of the CISOs had no idea what business context. Like they just couldn't answer the questions. They didn't know. They couldn't tie to a meaningful IT metric. They couldn't tie to a meaningful business outcome. And so there's a great book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And it talks about aligning value systems in order to get to the same outcomes. So all buyers and sellers want efficient outcomes that exactly meet the buyer's needs. They all do. And so if you put yourself on the same table as I'm here to get an efficient deal that meets your needs exactly, and it's perfectly okay for me to not have the solution that you want, then this sort of like pressure that I'm going to force you in a box or make you be in a corner dissipates, and you can have much more psychological air, and you have a much more relaxed, open, functional dialogue with a person who's actually trying to help you. And I know you see that in people. They say mostly salespeople will say things like they're helping whatever they're helping, and most of the time, that's not true, because they've also got somebody behind them saying, "Hey, your quota, your pipeline is light, your quota is upside down. So let's go. Let's get the move on." So I don't know. Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play is a super transformative book for me in terms of the buyer-seller relationship, and it was so that I could sell services to CISOs. But it's had a big impact on me.
And I think that a lot of CISOs have their guards up. Again, if you hear a question, like I said, what keeps you up at night, I think you immediately clam up in a shell because
yeah,
it's
man.
just, so you have to learn how to ask these questions. But again, I think that that's why a lot of the salespeople are lacking, is that they don't get enough. First of all, I don't think they make the investment in really understanding and reading books like the one you wrote, for example, and we'll touch upon that as well, since it's a good segue. They don't make the investment personally, and therefore they're not getting trained enough to ask these type of intelligent questions that shows that you are a real partner or potential partner. As part of the engagement. You're just asking like the regular questions, and you start asking, okay, what's your budget? What's your timeline? Who's responsible, and so on. And at that point, I think you clam up as a CISO or as a director of security. You clam up and you don't share that. So this is a good segue. So you go ahead.
I'd just love to say this. So I was a technical support person in a sales capacity. That's what I was, right? I was a sales engineer, effectively, on services. And I'd like to challenge the solutions engineers to do the qualification questions, because they have the street cred. Don't force your rep to ask those hard, when is this due? Do you have a budget? The band, the qualification. Have your technical person do it in the dialogue during their technical discovery, and I think you have a less armed person if you're in the middle of an architecture session and you're talking about things, and you say, "Hey, I need to understand what kind of budget you have, because it's going to help us steer whether we pick Palo Alto Prisma Access or we pick a couple of VMs that we're going to short-term get you licensed up on. The difference could be between 30 grand and 80 grand or something on this particular solution." That's a totally different qualification, feel from you're in the midst of solving an actual problem, and you need this information not because it's going to tell you whether you can forecast properly, whether you're going to close this deal by the end of the quarter and how much money it's going to put in your pocket, but instead because it's going to help you design a meaningful solution that ties exactly to the business outcome, which is it's got to be in the budget. So I think, I don't know, I think that sales engineers could stand a little taller and stop shying away from the commercial conversations.
Yeah, and they always say, "Oh, I'm like, I'm not the sales. I'm like the sales engineer."
Yeah.
So, what's the value of even having salespeople? I mean, it seems like a lot of times today, a lot of this stuff is inbound, right? So, by the time that somebody reaches out to you, they've already like halfway through the purchasing process. They already made the research. They kind of know what they want and so on. And so what happens a lot is that they reach out to the company, and then, typically there's a process where the BDR books the meeting, which is already like, it's just an inbound, and then the salesperson shows up, but they don't really talk that much, and they let somebody like you used to be come over and do a lot of the talking. So what is the value, because again, you mentioned that, the sales engineer can do a lot of the heavy lifting and the conversation because they carry the cloud. So where does the salesperson fits in?
Well, I think from a sales engineer perspective, the salesperson sets the meetings and hears the no's. And it's hard, man. It's like, I don't know if you've ever been in an actual sales role, but to hear no so many times is just like soul draining. It is. And I think a lot of us who were on support roles back at the time, but very few of us made the transition into an account rep role, even though the money was a lot stronger. If you had the resilience, the personality and the resilience and the persistence. And I just knew that if I had to transition into that and just constantly hear no, that it would have an effect on me personally. And I didn't want to pay that price. It was not worth the extra cash. And so I just, I have to empathize with those guys, because it is on one hand, you get all the credit because you're the rep, and you get the bigger paycheck. And on the other hand, when things don't go sideways, the measurement is absolute. It's very clear. And if you can't perform 2 quarters in a row or 3 quarters in a row, whoever the sales manager is, you're gone. So there's an enormous amount of pressure. It's competitive. And you see a lot of athletes go into sales because of the competitive nature and because of the immediate reward. It's like, you score a touchdown, or you put a ball 3 inches from the hole on the golf course or something like that. And there's this, again, it's an adrenaline rush. You get the same thing in sales for sure. So
yeah,
I have a ton of respect for these guys. These they call them the Eagles or the Rainmakers or whatever. Man, like they're really, really good at their craft. And if we're honest, what they're doing is not that different from what we're doing. We're trying to influence outcomes. No CISO out there has the budget or the control. Every one of us has to get things done through influence, and it's the same game for those guys. So you see a lot of CISOs burning out, and it's because their influence game sucks. I mean, in some cases, not all cases. There's obviously, I don't want to make it sound like that's the only reason why people, burning
100%.
out.
And I think the entire economy is driven by someone convincing and influencing someone else to do something. Whether it's to buy something or make a decision. It's a 360, and you end up selling to your board, you end up selling to your peers, you end up selling to even the people that report to you. If you can, become that leader. And what is leadership? Leadership is convincing that you're the right person to lead. And so it's a 360, selling all around. And that's why I think, you're right. I don't think the sales profession gets enough credit. And some people are saying, they almost feel not ashamed. It's not maybe the word, but they're not comfortable saying, "Oh, I'm a salesperson," even though despite the fact that the entire economy is based on, and that's what people don't realize. The fact you even get a paycheck, it doesn't matter who you work for. There's somebody out there that generates generates that revenue, and you have to have that. Otherwise, your paycheck is, in our world, is not. You're not going to get it every 2 weeks. And I think a lot of people have that disconnect.
You said the comment, people hesitate to admit they're a salesperson. When I was in the role at Fishnet, you have to do an intro in every one of these calls, and the math basically said, if I don't have at least 7 calls a day, 7 calls a week with qualified on-site calls with qualified customers, then I don't hit my number. That's basically what it said. And I knew that some number of these calls were not going to be qualified because some reps are better than others. And I had to introduce myself in every one of those meetings. And I will tell you, I would have this sinking feeling in my gut every time, because I was a salesperson and I didn't want to admit that. And finally, when I read that book, Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play, and I transformed my way of thinking about what is my role, why am I here, what am I doing in the room, I had a much easier time introducing myself and having the conversation and feeling okay, because I felt like I was turning my back on my technical roots, and you can just feel it. People, as a salesperson, you walk in the room and people. I've had direct peers say, all salespeople are liars and cheats, and they're just out to line their pockets. And so when people feel that way, the way they treat you also gets reflected through microaggressions and other things. So yeah, man, it's really interesting for stirring up all kinds of stuff inside of me from those days. So.
and I think you're right. Getting so many no's, I think it's almost like after a while they get burnt out. It's almost like they have PTSD that's related to being in the trenches, literally in the trenches for so many years, and it's and experiencing the adversity of trying to get revenue in the door.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because it has as much to do with the team sell as anything, and I don't know if all salespeople really recognize this, but sort of standing back and watching the guys who were really successful and the guys who struggled. The people who were really successful ended up having other players really support them, and they had this huge organizational support. And I watched reps from different vendors be very successful with one vendor and leave and really struggle to do anything in a better company with better technology, because they didn't have the community of support behind them. They didn't have the legal team wasn't inspired to respond quickly, and they were not using the best SEs and other things like that. And so you would see their incomes get cut, and you could see that they were panicking because they just bought a boat and they thought they were going to do even better at this new company with better tech. And you could see sweating bullets and stuff. I mean, that was all very real.
And the reason I think they failed at that is because they did not succeed in selling internally who they are and what can they bring to the table. Yeah,
and that's not different than a CISO role, right? Like Malcolm Harkins talks about in his book. He talks about the battlefield, the internal battlefield, and the external battlefield. The external battlefield being, how do I do all the protection against the hackers and the threat landscape and all that stuff? And the internal battlefield is he calls out 3 Bs. I forget what they are: budgets, bureaucracy, and there's another B. I always forget what the other B is, but yeah, very much the same. If you don't have that support to facilitate your success as a CISO, just like a sales rep, you're not going to be successful.
And that leads me to you're so well read. Why did you decide to co-write the CISO Evolution with Rock Lambers? This is something that you kind of launched recently, and you obviously saw a gap. And it's like being an entrepreneur, right? A lot of entrepreneurs seeing that there's something out there that's missing, and it's potentially through their own experiences while they're doing something else. And I'm assuming that's what happened to you here.
Yeah, I would go to, so at some point when I was younger and I didn't have a kid, I would go to everything with Rocky Mountain InfoSec, ISSI, the Internet Users Group, OWASP. I was at everything. I went to everything. And you would hear again and again and again, and we address this kind of in the interlude or the intro to the book, people say you've got to talk to the business in business language. And so then I would go up and ask these people after the conference or the conversation or the presentation or whatever, hey, what does that mean? Like, give me an example. How does that work? Like, how do I go from, I don't have business language. I'm a guy who was writing code, and I don't know business language, so how do I do it? So I had this big, long debate with my wife. We saved and saved and saved, and we finally we got to the point where we were gonna, where I could either afford to do an MBA or we could do a round the world trip. And so we opted to sell everything and live in a double wide, split actually a double wide with another person. And then after a year, while making the most money I had ever made as a salesperson, we ended up doing a 15-month round the world trip. And then I came back and I still wanted to do the MBA. And so that's when I finally decided to sign up for the MBA. And after doing the MBA, there will be moments in each of these different topics, you know, your supply chain course or your finance course or your managerial statistics course or whatever, where I would think to myself, oh, that's how you do it. This is an opportunity for the CISO to elevate the discussion and bring business context. And so I started making notes. And if you look on my LinkedIn, right after I had a blog that basically said, I'm gonna do this series of blogs where I'm just gonna talk about each of these different courses. So that had been sitting for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and I just never got to it. I think I wrote two of them, and then Rock and I were at this. Yeah, go ahead.
It comes back to my point is like it's much easier for someone to just have a conversation about it as opposed to write these blogs. And I think now the way people consume, like you mentioned, you have your young kid is like they're growing up, they're just watching stuff, listening to stuff. And I think we have to convert some of these, even your book. That's why we're doing this today. We're going to discuss some of the topics. So basically, converted these blog posts into, or kind of redirected them into a written book, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't leave out the importance of Rock, who either had the ignorance or the courage to really push us to do this, and the ambition, because without him, it doesn't get done. And he split the work, and we both had MBAs, and we said, well, let's carve it up. And I picked the topics that I was most passionate about, and he and I are such opposites in every possible way that worked out well. So he wanted to talk about all the soft, squishy stuff, and I wanted to talk about the edgy, sort of innovative use of things like statistics and finance and whatever, valuation. And then we had other support too. Rich Sierson gave us intros to our publisher Wiley, and Wiley has been really good. I mean, they have gotten us in front of every possible sales channel that you could get, and we could have gone the route that like Gary Hayslip and others went, where they self-published and then self-promoted. So I don't know. We've had a lot of really good supporters.
And I had the great pleasure to interview Rock, and he's
cool.
Yeah, you're right. He is you can just tell he's very different than you, like just in terms of even how he carries himself. Not in a bad way, just different. And so tell me a bit about the book itself. It's you mentioned it's divided kind of into 2 sections, and there are different chapters. How should be read? Is a reference book, or maybe like talk to me about the kind of the audience and how it should be read and what's kind of the key takeaways.
Well, the audience was intended for cybersecurity leadership, but like you mentioned, we've actually had a number of sales folks leverage the book to gain empathy and understanding about kind of just what happens in the role. So it is actually 3 sections. It's fundamental business knowledge, communications, and leadership. And we split the chapters down the middle So I wrote the first 5 chapters. I think Rock wrote the next few, and then I wrote the last chapter on negotiation. Each chapter is kind of carved up. So we provide what we think is the opportunity, and we frame it up using storytelling in most cases, so that you can really understand. And that's where maybe some of our personality and storytelling comes through. So those are probably easier pages to read. Then we offer the theory, so you can contemplate, like, okay, so here's this opportunity, and here's the theory that we're going to apply in order to potentially exploit this opportunity. And then we wrap it up with a series of case studies that are real, valid case studies that have occurred inside of our careers, with very tangible, actionable things that you can implement in your career. And then, of course, we do like a key insights or whatever. So yeah, that's the structure of the book. And how's it meant to be read? So originally what we set out to do was to say, you don't need an MBA. Instead of spending $100,000 on an MBA, read this book. That was why we wrote the book. And there are different areas and exposure that different people will have. And so what we hoped to be able to do was to allow people to read each chapter independently. So if you're struggling to connect to your business, at least understand the business model. So there's a chapter that has a use case and demonstrates business models and how to map them. Understand how to read your financial report, and understand how your company is valued. So we walk through those 3 topics. If you're struggling to secure the budget that you need, there's a chapter on business cases. There's a chapter on communication and influencing. There's a chapter on COSO and storytelling. So those would be the kind of more the central themes that I would gravitate to if I was trying to pick those out. And I think in the introduction, we at least highlight with enough detail that somebody who's paying attention is going to look at things and probably pick up the book and migrate directly to a particular chapter. To be fair, I think you probably need the foundational business knowledge to really extract the full value out of the later chapters. So you probably need those to be read. And to be fair, if you dive into some of the work that Rock did on mapping out COSO and tying that to a larger enterprise risk framework, if you skip the front end of those chapters, then you're probably going to struggle on the last few chapters. But I would hope that you could pick up each chapter and read it independently and get some, meaningful insights out of it.
And as somebody who's done the MBA as well, I can tell you that I think that you do an MBA and you do all those case studies, and then sometimes it's hard to figure out how to apply that, because a lot of times the cases you talk, you look at the Procter and Gamble, or you do Gantt charts and all kind of like things that are very like almost a pie in the sky type of thing, and then you come to the day-to-day operations and you come across things that are, okay, how do I take and you're nodding, so maybe I'll let you speak. Maybe like, how do you solve that kind of, the lofty MBA on one side and the day-to-day kind of grind sometimes to get things done?
A problem, what is it? A problem well defined is a problem half solved. I think that you're right. The MBA case studies, they present all of the pertinent facts and maybe a couple of distracting facts, and they package it up and it's a really nice thing. But the reality is that when you're in the midst of the whirlwind, which is a specific reference to the 4 disciplines of execution, when you're in the midst of the whirlwind, it's hard to separate out what things are really important or germane to, or even sort of root caused and influencing the current situation, right? So it's not always apparent. To me, for example, a person who's very analytical but maybe lacks the emotional intelligence or the self-awareness to really really capture or be aware of. You know, maybe not, now is not the right time for me to say this, or maybe sorry, my son is here.
So let's talk a bit about, so you again, just even the fact that you kind of did a world tour. I mean, that's not trivial. You ended up, and it's by itself is gives you an additional layer of being more rounded individual and have a greater appreciation to various different cultures. And I think again for us as in the U.S. and just in North America in general, I think we're very centric, right? So we always talk about diversity and so on, and you know, the fact that it provides additional power as an organization. You know, do you find, what would be like kind of the key takeaways from you, like traveling, and then talk to me about where you are today and how we're having this conversation? You mentioned Starlink before we started having, and that would be of interest to, I think, a lot of people as well.
Yeah. Gosh, what would be the big takeaways? Well, at some point I did write a blog for a travel organization, and I wrote about the benefits of travel to any executive. So I probably should reference that. I don't remember what I said. I mean,
you probably just the flashbacks.
Yeah, the thing that really stands out for me is there's an exercise that you do where you say, what are the things that you would need if you were going to survive? And depending on the culture that you come from and the things that you've been exposed to, you might select very dramatically different things. So, for example, if you lived in the rainforest in Costa Rica, the things that you would bring to mind that you need to survive would be quite different than if you're in a semi-arid or very arid mountainous area like where I am here in Mexico now. And so I think just the idea of having been to the different areas and seen 10 different ways that people make coffee, or having seen the different manners in which homes are constructed, or the different materials that people use, or the different approaches to waste management, or the different approaches to commerce, and frankly, the availability or not of a central banking system, and all kinds of, sort of broad systems. And then I think you also being exposed to larger, broader world events throughout history. So you can't go to Cambodia without hearing about Pol Pot and the genocide that took place there. And you can't go through Germany without experiencing the wall and thinking and talking about those experiences. And the similar story, like there's all kinds of Soviet influence and impact on all of the different places throughout Eastern Europe. So I think all of that has an impact on the way that you frame problems and the way that you think about things. And for me, it challenged me to look at things from a much more broad perspective. I think at the time when we did the travel, I was super into exploring religion. And so I spent a lot of time reading about different religions. I spent a bunch of time in the Bhagavad Gita and read a bunch about Buddha, and went to his birthplace, and we did a yoga teacher training and a handful of other things just for the exposure to a more Eastern mentality. And then I think we did 3 months of language study in Beijing, and we lived in the Second Ring Road, and we visited, all the way out to the Seventh Ring Road, and just experiencing, like, getting in the subway and seeing what it's like in the center of Beijing and what it's like on the outskirts of Beijing. Just gives you a real appreciation for even the disparity in class systems inside of cultures outside of your own.
Yeah, man. I hear you speaking, and all I can think about is the Sake commercial, the most interesting man in the world. Like how you've done all those things. And again, it's just, it truly is amazing. And it's amazing that you take like all those experiences and you apply them in some way to our discipline.
I mean, that's true. Not. It's not like it's some. I mean, I think that's true of all people, right? You take your personal experiences and you intentionally apply them. I think I've done a bunch of personality studies, and there are some things that I do better than some other folks. So I think one of the things that I do is pattern recognize, and I'm able to then bring those patterns and communicate those. So on one hand, that's good. On the other hand, I have a lot less talent and things come not easy to me. So I have just grinded out things more than anything. And I think that's true of a lot of, like, if you look at UFC fighters, they're naturally talented people, and there are people who are very gifted and can articulate. You think about John Jones or DC, Daniel Cormier. Jones beat DC a couple of times, and he's all talent. Whereas DC is out, training kids and able to do his detailed shows and articulate exactly what people are doing and why and how this has an impact on the broader game. So I don't know. I think obviously both have their merits.
Yeah, but it's you mentioned though that you have to have a little bit of both, and I think that the talent and the ability to make the effort, and you did. It shows in the whole journey, your journey, that you like just not even the academia, but all the stuff you've done, that you did definitely put in the effort. And I think you're just being humble as well about the talent. Hey, so quick question for you. So you are now in Mexico, and we are having this communication through the Starlink. And again, I think that's with the world becoming more, decentralized, if you wish, and people are moving from, becoming digital nomads. What was that experience like? Because, we're having this conversation, but you are in a very remote area of Mexico. First, why did you make the decision to move there? And then what was the experience like to set the system like that up?
Well, my son is being raised bilingual, and he won't have forever to have a lot of exposure to his grandparents, who are thankfully in good health today. And so this is one of the more remote places that we've had the opportunity to go, believe it or not. And I wanted him exposed to his heritage in a very tangible way. I wanted him to be able to walk around the town and to have his mom tell him, when I was 6, that's the faucet that I would go and bring water back to the house from. Or this is the river, and you can see that the houses used to be down closer by the river, and the reconstruction of the town brought the entire town up. Or this is how a gravity-fed water system functions, and there's lots of other benefits. His grandfather is a farmer, runs about 80 cattle, I think, down here. And there's cows and chickens and all kinds of things going on here that just don't happen in the streets of Brooklyn. And so creating that kind of awareness and context of privilege and opportunity, and also just kind of expanding his exposure so that he can have a more robust set of experiences to draw from when he's problem solving throughout his life, I think was really important. So that was part of it. Yeah.
Matt, quick question. Did he ever have to explain to his grandparents what it is that you do?
Do I have to? Well, he's only 4, so he doesn't. Oh. Yeah.
But did you explain? So I guess because I think that there's such a, on the surface at least, there's such a gap between what they do and then what you do from a technology. They're very low tech, and then you are on the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, there's definitely been a handful of questions like, what do you do all day? Because there's 20 people full-time in this town population. And of course you, not like in New York, you don't make eye contact and you stare at the ground when you walk past people, and it would be totally impractical to pause and have a conversation with every person in town. But if you avoid eye contact or don't say hello, and basically every time that you encounter someone here, you would probably be considered rude. There have been questions from the little kids in town to say, how can you work all day inside? They don't, like, the concept is very confusing for them. I think that, one of the first couple of things that we did down here was install an air conditioner and heated water, and not everybody has those luxuries here. And it's been 95 degrees for the last 2 weeks down here. So yeah, there's quite a contrast, I think.
And then technology is advanced, that you are able to do that. You have to be able to work inside in such a remote area. So Starlink is something you applied for way ahead in advance, right? And you see, how was that experience? What is it you get? You get like a box, like, how does that work?
Yeah, I could do the unboxing ceremony. I actually still have a box sitting right there. First, in order to order in a foreign country, so I think that what's true is they have made the cost of the hardware and the subscription affordable for each of the economies, and not all economies are equivalent. So the cost to run Starlink in Brooklyn is different than the cost to run it here. We're in a town that doesn't have street names or street numbers, and the Mexican government doesn't deliver here. So we had to have our Starlink delivered to other relatives, and my wife's Mexican, so we had the opportunity to do that. You actually have to have the equivalent of a Mexican social security number in order to order Starlink in a foreign country like this. And then they also set up and how you specify the exact GPS locations. And I'm not clear as to whether you could or could not operate the Starlink satellite once you've got it and from a different location. Clearly, they would be able. You don't know if they
geofence it?
Yeah, I don't know if they do or they don't. Certainly, like my CTO has Starlink and Powerwall as well, and his Starlink is on his boat. And so I think that obviously there are roaming versions of Starlink, and I don't know if those subscriptions come with different fees or if that hardware operates differently. But in this case, you register. Once you finally, we had to actually go through a full process of getting the IDs to have the number to be able to be eligible, and then order it shipped to a relative's house because we couldn't get it here, and then go to that town and pick it up. So there was some extra steps involved for us to get the internet kind of up and configured out here. And we could have used a local internet provider. The speeds are much higher, and we're not bound to some kind of constraints. Like in this particular town, there are 2 towers that are tied to solar. And so last year when we came, we borrowed internet from one of the guys up the street. But if it was cloudy, the internet didn't work, which is clearly not practical. You can't call in and say, I can't work today because it's cloudy.
That'll be the first,
other thing,
by the way.
Yeah, right. And the other thing is, because they're solar paneled, it takes a certain amount of time in the morning. So there's a limit to how early you can start working. And it's earlier, to get started at 10 in New York, you have to get started much earlier here. And so we were right at the cusp of being able to work. And some days, like your first meeting, you just miss. So those were probably the real drivers, where we wanted a more reliable source in order to be down here, and just to be able to extend the opportunity for Aleko to have exposure to his grandparents and to his heritage.
And do you find I'm assuming there's latencies associated with because the satellite that has a certain amount of time to go up and then go down?
No, it's fast. Every now and then, like, I don't know if we'll experience it here, but every now and then you get I'll tell you this and then I'll tell you the other thing. Every now and then you get like a 30-second gap or a blip in the conversation, like something queued up. And I'm not exactly sure why that happens, but that's kind of been a repeat experience. the other day there was a thunderstorm that came through that blew out a transformer in a different town that caused our power to go down. And of course, without an independent power source, we were stuck. So I ended up scrambling during a half-day event to get my first generator up, and the first generator was vibrating too much and vibrated the plug out and killed the internet again. So we ended up getting a second generator, and that seemed to work for the rest of the day. So, there's some other things, like we'll probably look at the potential for solar and potentially power, like the Powerwall or some other kind of clean independent source. I'm also super concerned that we've got this thing plugged into this power, but I don't know whether there's going to be spikes or brownouts over an extended period of time. And if you damage the equipment, I mean, it's not like there's going to be an immediate router replacement opportunity, right? So that would put an end to potentially my work week, because it'd take at least 3 or 4 days to get out of here.
You just have to get another one, have like a failover.
Right, a backup.
That to like a search protector or some sort of. And this is what you just described. It's really interesting. Again, this is problem solving. What you just went through. It's just a process of elimination and figure out, how to solve all those issues, and that can be applied anywhere in life, right? So from cybersecurity issues to management to everything else, and I think that's something we don't teach enough at school. I think that the problem solving of again, just to mention that you had to plug in the generator and it kind of shakes, that not something that you can almost even simulate unless you had to experience that. And it's almost endless number of problems that come across. I think the curriculum, and even in MBA, right? So they don't necessarily teach you how to solve issues. They're more of a academic theory type of thing, but in real life. And then I think that's also, again, from the younger generation, like playing a lot of the video games. In the video games, there's only a limited number of problems you can solve. And it's very almost synthetic in a sense, but you mentioned that the kinetic issues of connectivity and sun and so on is something that you can only experience if you actually do that. And again, I think you're now exposed.
I'll take this all the way back to, you think about cyber risk quantification, right? A lot of these cyber risk models end up coming up with a series or a set of scenarios. And inherently, the way that you do cyber quantification can be influenced by the model that you build. And that model, so all models are wrong. Some are more useful than others. I think that's a Doug Hubbard or a Rich Syrson quote. And so when you start to do this quantification approach and you limit the different models that you have, just like you said, you synthetically impair the number of potential outcomes, then you're going to inherently bias your model in a particular direction, either too much risk or not enough risk, not enough variability, or overconfidence in the number that you present. If you're saying we have a 95% confidence interval, that there's a 24% chance that there will be a breach in the next 3 years or something like that. Maybe your confidence is too high. So yeah, all of those same concepts synthetically, like you said, limiting the potential options are immediately applicable to the cyber risk quant story. It's cool analogy.
Super interesting. Really super interesting. Matt, I would love to do these more often, because it's just it seems like we're going tangent, and I had so many things that I wanted to talk to you about today, but I didn't get a chance to. And so maybe we'll table another time to chat. We'll have a couple of episodes, and I'll maybe just even cover some other topics that you experience and have some insight on. But between now and then, I would love to, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you for anything, just from getting connected to you or talking about some experiences to advisory or whatnot? What's the easiest way?
The best way is just to hit up www.cisoevolution.com. You can get a quick browse on the book. There's links to it in Amazon. So that's to source the book. Of course, the book is available in Apple and Audible and all of the places, because we leveraged a top tier publisher. And then also on that, there's direct links to both Rock and myself from a LinkedIn perspective. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm more active on LinkedIn. If you look at my Twitter, you'll notice that it's basically dead. Yeah, I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn, and have had a number of readers and other folks, and we, whether it's mentorship or questions on the book or just ideation, happy to participate with the listeners in all of those capacities. Just have a little patience with me because there's a lot going on, and CISOevolution.com.
Awesome. And then we should definitely do one with Rock, maybe like a joint one where we go on and talk about things, because he's got an amazing perspective as well. We should definitely table some of that, and it's just amazing to be able to talk to you at the other side. And maybe we'll do one with you. I don't know, you get like a stronger router, maybe do a quick tour of the outside, just when we're having this conversation. And again, thank you so much to provide the time today. Much appreciated. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I'm sure the audience would too as well. And until then, thank you again, and looking forward to seeing you all in the next episode. Safe out
right
there.
On, appreciate it. Sounds
Online.
great. Appreciate
Online.
it. I had fun too. Yeah.
Offline. Take care.